Hello, folks. This is Jennifer from CraftSanity. I decided that I was going to do a little video slideshow today to show you one of my latest projects. I recently had my boat rocked, and this happened when I found out that I was no longer going to be a newspaper columnist. My newspaper, the Grand Rapids Press and MLive.com, has been cutting positions pretty steadily for the last several years. And I survived many rounds of cuts, and I did not survive the latest one. So I was a freelance writer most recently. I was full-time at one point, and then I went part-time and then freelance. And these were voluntary moves that I made to be available to my children. But I've been holding on as a columnist and just learned a few weeks ago that I was going to need to wind things down. I thought, oh my gosh, like, what am I going to do? And at first I was going to do a letterpress. Like, I was going to try to get a letterpress and then print a message on the quilt very large. Now, that's a crazy idea for a lot of reasons. The number one is that I didn't own a letterpress, and I didn't know anybody with gigantic type. Now, I'm still looking for a letterpress and gigantic type. I haven't completely given up that dream, but it was tabled for this project. So instead, I was preparing for an interview about a week and a half ago with Sherry Lynn Wood, who is the author of the new book, The Improv Handbook for Modern Quilters, a guide to creating, quilting, and living courageously. And I had about 35 minutes to prep for the interview before I was scheduled to call Sherry, and I'd been reading her book, and I decided, I'm just going to try to dive right in. And she has the projects kind of divided. She's prepared kind of scores, like a musical score. So there's a set of instructions that you get before you dive into each project. I just started with the first one, which is floating squares, where you're cutting up squares in random sizes. You can have some criteria that you can follow, and she gives a lot of suggestions about where you can go with this. And I kind of read some of the initial directions, and then I kind of just went my own way. But before we got to that point, I just pulled out fabric that was in a train case, fabric I dyed back in September. I had 4 colors at the time, like a yellowish, orangey color, green, a bright pink, and then a turquoise. I did several. I dyed some fabric, and then I pulled it out, and then I put more fabric in. So I got some variation of the tone, and I had some natural undyed fabric, and then I had some bleached white fabric that I was dyeing. So, and this is flour sack tea towel fabric. So it was really kind of cool to work with fabric that quilters back in the day used to use, back before the fabric stores and all those things were totally available to us. In the 35 minutes before I talked to Sherry, I cut up some squares and then started sewing them together. Tried to just piece 2 colors together, and the 2 squares were 2 different sizes. So then I was adding the natural color as the filler. And then I did the interview with Sherry. We had a great talk. That's episode 156 of the CraftSanity podcast. So you can head over to CraftSanity and listen to that interview if you'd like. And then after that, I went back to quilting and just kind of kept going. And I thought, okay, this is what I'm going to do, because I wanted to make something to show my gratitude to my readers. And I knew that just saying thank you didn't seem like enough. So I wanted to make something really big. So I kept adding squares, and I tried to work with 2 colors at a time. And at first, when I got about half of this center panel square done, I was like, okay, this is taking a long time. And I started this on a Wednesday, and my deadline for my last column was the following Monday. I thought, okay, I'm just going to try to keep going. So I kept cutting up squares and doing some little color studies and taking pictures. And I was really enjoying seeing how the colors looked next to each other and the challenge of trying to make everything fit. Well, I got to this point where I was like, yeah, I don't think I like this anymore. I had half of it kind of sewn together, and I started making this other half, and I was like, yeah, I don't know if I like this. As you can see, some of these are really small, these little pieces, like 2 inches, and I have 3 pieces sewn together in a 2-inch space. But I kept going and kept going and kept going. And then I added some darker pink, and I was like, oh no, now I've ruined it. So there's a lot of second guessing that went on, but I kept just kind of pushing the voices out of my head that were saying this is bad, this doesn't look that good. And I just committed to it and said, nope, I'm finishing this. And then I started taking a lot of detail photos of how the textures and how the fabrics look next to each other, and was like, man, I think I really do like this. So as you can see, this is how things kind of ended up. I did some trimming around the edges because it was kind of an irregular shape. I found that when I was doing this piecing, it's better to cut after, like leave the extra pieces on. Don't cut them away until you're sure you don't need them, because once you cut it off, you cannot glue it back on. So there are my dirty little slippers at the bottom of the photo there. Then I decided that I was going to add a white border around because I like Polaroid pictures, the whole concept of the old style. And so I thought I'm going to put a border around this bright improv quilt piece. And I was a little bit hesitant about that because I'm not really traditionally a huge fan of putting natural cotton with a white, a stark white, but I just kept going. I was like, all right, don't think too much about it. Just keep going. I sewed the border on, the white border, and had the thicker strip across the bottom there. Then I had fabric on hand that I used for the border. I decided to add a print, and that was just Eclectic Elements, a Jim Holtz fabric design, and it's dictionary pages. I really wanted to have newspaper pages, but I couldn't find, I didn't have anything in my stash. And I would say I probably had about 2 yards of this fabric. I didn't measure really anything. I eyeballed everything from the batting, backing, everything. And all of it came from my basement fabric stash. I'm not sure if that's good or bad that I had everything I needed, including the batting, and didn't have to go anywhere. And I made sure that one side of the quilt, it was kind of irregular. I didn't want that modern part to kind of be perfectly centered. So I made sure that it was off center. So one side of the quilt is wider than the other. And that was intentional. I almost did not have enough of the dictionary page large border that I was using. I didn't panic about it. I'm like, well, whatever, I'll work it out as I go. And it turned out that I was able to piece the bottom corner together, and it is fine. It worked, and there's a little bit left, which is amazing when you think about it. And then I decided that I really wanted to have text on here. I really wanted to have like what looked like typewriter font, because I figured that symbolized journalism. But then I thought, no, I want this to be personal. I'm just going to write it in my own handwriting. Now, I probably could have got some giant fabric marker and just wrote on the fabric in my own handwriting, and that would have been so much easier. But no, I'm a printmaker. So I wrote out the thank you on a giant piece of paper, and then I transferred that handwriting design to linoleum, carved the linoleum, printed that back onto fabric. My press was just big enough to run this thing through. There's a photo where you can see my feet. So it gives you a sense of how big this image is. It's pretty big. And there are a couple pieces where I was carving so fast that I carved right through the block. And I actually cut myself at least once. So it was ridiculous. Did that on deadline. And, and this is not me trying to say like, oh, look at me, I'm a superhero. It's not at all what I'm saying. But what was good about this project is at all the points when I was like, this is too hard, I can't do this, I was like, no, I can totally do this. And I just kept going. And I didn't really brush my hair. And my husband kind of was like, oh, do you want to eat something? So the people in my family kind of helped, kind of keep me nourished during this point. But I just kind of kept going. And it was so good for me to do this because I just got to throw myself into a project that didn't require me to dwell so much on what was going to happen next. I was just like, just keep going. The one thing that I did that I probably would do differently is I basted this with thread, doubled thread, and I kind of went an X across the quilt and then vertically and horizontally across. So I have 4 lines going through. My stitches are so huge that when I was doing the free motion quilting afterwards, they really got in the way. But, I worked around it, just kind of cut them and pulled them out as I went. I started in the very center of the quilt with a little spiral. I did not do a lot of practicing free motion. I recommend that if you're going to make a quilt, do some practice. I was on deadline. I didn't have time to practice. And I almost think that part of my experience was just go for it. But I was really worried about sewing over the piece design and ruining the design. I don't think I did that. I think it went okay. I did my little spiral, and then I did straight line quilting around on the white portion for the border. I sewed on the applique, the thank you applique. And if I had more time, I probably would have tried to print and centered the thank you and not added it as a patch, but just have it be part of that lower panel of white. But it's fine. Just kind of a random free motion pattern on the thank you patch and kind of kept things in a straight line format on the other parts of the white border. And then I did a kind of wavy lines around the, kind of in a log cabin format around the center design. So the background fabric just kind of has this pretty simple wavy design. The whole project, I would say, has been very cathartic and very, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I kind of just worked some stuff out by throwing myself into this. And then at the end, I got to, stand in front of it and take a picture showing that, just showing my appreciation, because this was for, I made this in honor of the readers who kept me in business for so long, writing about art and craft, all the people who shared their stories with me. And I wanted to do something that wasn't just writing. I wanted to give people something else. I also needed to go through a creative process to kind of get my mental state all in check here, just so I could be like, okay, this is a kind of a traumatic change and I'm going to be fine and I'm going to just make something, because that's what makers do. And I think that sometimes people think that their babies are born and really good things happen. People are like, oh yeah, I'm going to make something. But I think it's okay to remember that when things happen that aren't good, it's almost more important, I think, to make things then, because that's something that's going to help keep you centered and just let you work out some stuff. I can't express enough how just the whole theme of CraftSanity is really something that I live by. As you can see, Justine the cat has made herself right at home with this quilt. She appeared through multiple phases of this quilt making. And most recently, when I've been doing the binding, she's been, sitting on top of that quilt and napping while I'm, working on the part nearest me. So it's been a fun project that, and something I think really kind of cool that came out of kind of a negative experience in my life. So yeah, I just thought I'd share it. And also, a virtual high five to Sherry for coming out with her improv book at just the right time. All right, folks, if you have any comments about this or your own experiences with either improv quilting or just crafting and making art to cope with any kind of situations where your boat was rocked a little bit. And I'd love to hear about how you were able to work your way through a tough situation by making things. Oh, and it's called 30, by the way. It's called 30. It's named after the way that journalists used to always sign off on the end of their story. They would put dash 30 dash, and that was how they signified that all the text was there for the copy desk. And so that is the name of this quilt, and I'm still making a label. So I'll be working on that. But so it has kind of a journalism theme behind it, but you can't tell that by the quilt. And that's okay too. It's because not everything has to be obvious. The meaning can mean something to you, and then your viewer brings something else to it. So anyway, that's my quilt story.